My name's John F. Simon Jr., and we're sitting in my studio on 39th Street in Manhattan between 8th and 9th Avenue. And I've been here for 5 years, and I've been in Manhattan for 20 years. When we found this space, we saw the windows and we saw the light. I knew I could come here every day, I could get work done, I could be inspired. A place you're going to love being, that translates into good creative energy. Growing up in the South, and my father was a lawyer, and my mother was a mathematician, and it was always thought to take a practical approach. That's the reason I was in science for a while. That I was told, oh, you're creative, because I knew I had kind of a creative urge, but it was like, oh, well, in science, the creativity would be so much more valued because, but I went into it, but it just wasn't creative enough. At some point, probably 10 or 12 years ago, I began a kind of a disciplined practice of drawing every day. I was doing almost everything online. Everything was either a piece of software, a piece of programming, or drawing with software that I'd written. I'd made my own drawing program. So I'd spent, at that point, 5 or 6 years working really strictly on the computer, and one day I just sat down with a piece of paper and started to draw. And probably because I spent so much time struggling with the computer to draw, the fluidity and the immediacy of the drawing on the paper was pretty amazing. Just start with a piece of paper of a set size, and I sit quietly and try to clear my mind, and then something will happen, thought will arise, or it'll be my hand will want to make a mark, and then I react to that, and I improvise on top of that, and I let that go. So by the time you finish the card, you've worked through a lot of thoughts, and then you move to another card, and so you kind of mine through your subconscious, or whatever you want to call it, your creative sources. I find what's persistent on the cards, what continues to emerge on the cards. It's persistent, it comes to the fore. And then from that, I can distill that when it's time for the software and say, okay, what's pushing its way forward? And then I find out a way to represent that in code. And then it's rendered in the code, and I see it on the screen. This piece is being reworked. It's called Fountain. Actually, the screens go vertically, so you're seeing it laid out, but that's more or less how I work on it. And then I'll sit here, and I'll think about it. I'll look at it, and I'll say, well, maybe these patterns could be this way, or this color could ramp differently, or it could change differently. Or what I'm working on is the flooring, that's kind of wavy flooring. I'm working on the strength of the springs and try to figure out a really good amount that they should bounce up and down, and the speed, and trying to get that where I really like it. And so what you do is you quit, and then, bang, here you are in some, text. So here's a text screen, and here's all your variables, the size of the grids, the background scale, and this is wave strength. This parameter is wave strength 0.001. So let's just actually make it really something really different, like 0.1, which is quite different than 0.001, and see what happens. And then you run it, and it'll compile it and link it. Now it turns it into code that'll actually, those words start. So now look at the floor. See, it's gone wild. So that's too wild. So then you go 0.01, which is in between, and that'll roll up and run. Okay, so that's actually a little more bouncy, but maybe too bouncy. So then you make it 0.05, which is kind of in between there, and you sort of play with the numbers until you get it where you like it. And that's a little bit more bouncy than it was, so you could leave it there and you watch it propagate. So let's leave it there for a little while. You can make it anything. It's anything. There's no right answer in programming. It's as creative as drawing. It's every possibility. That's the really amazing thing. When you first start writing software, you think it's like math, like you have to solve a piece of software, like a math problem, but it's not. It's more like creative writing. It's more like sitting down with a blank piece of paper and writing a story. When When you move your hand, you see a mark, and that influences the next mark you make. And when the software progresses, what's just previously been on the screen influences what comes next. So the feedback is an important element in all of it. Here was nothing. Then it was circles. Then like, okay, I'm going to micro design that. It became these. And then from those, pretty much this area got brought out, and that's what came out in there. All the software uses the same principle. It sets out a set of parameters, 20, 30 parameters, and spends all its time displaying images in real time on the screen that are always just a little bit different than the last one. And so if you watch the software piece over time, it's going to always be a little bit different than it ever was, never exactly going to repeat. So it has a kind of a living quality to it that way. I like that about it. It's more like a plant, than a painting. I got very interested in the sign business because they put things up on the wall in kind of interesting new ways, and they were starting to work with electronics and mounting electronics. So I went to a sign show, and sign makers used laser cutters to engrave signs and to cut out shapes. I could write any software I wanted, and then I could find its way into all sorts of materials. So I use Formica and plexiglass quite a bit because they're shaped and cut really nicely from the pieces of software and the things that I draw. I probably owe the greatest debt at the moment to Paul Klee, who's a Bauhaus artist, and I think really my teacher, even though I never met the guy. I've read his notebooks pretty extensively. A lot of his ideas really influential. I think one of the biggest, most influential ideas of his was when he tried to set out the rules for drawing for his Bauhaus students. He tried to kind of like systematize drawing in a way. And I think, he knew the bounds of that. But for me, what it showed was that I could be as analytical as possible and still be self-expressive. When you choose something in a restaurant, you're making a creative choice for your life. When you say something to your child, you're making a creative choice. And you start to see all these vessels for creativity and how you're expressing yourself consciously or unconsciously in all sort of aspects. And then it opens up, and then the source of creativity turns out like the whole world is creative. In fact, nature itself, what does it do? What does nature do? It reproduces, it creates all the time, everywhere. And when you get into that, it's like, wow, it's a big field to work on.